As the clock ticked down to a potentially transformative August 1 tariff deadline, the global trade landscape remained in flux, characterized by 11th-hour negotiations, new agreements, and escalating tensions. In a move that offered a temporary reprieve for North American supply chains, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day delay on the imposition of new tariffs on Mexico, pushing back duties that were set to take effect imminently. This decision, conveyed via a Truth Social post, followed a phone call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and acknowledged the complexities of a deal with Mexico due to border issues. However, existing tariffs, including a 25% fentanyl tariff, 25% on cars and 50% on steel, aluminum and copper, will remain in place, with Mexico agreeing to terminate its non-tariff trade barriers. This latest extension for Mexico stood in stark contrast to the administration's generally firm stance ahead of the self-imposed tariff deadline, which had already been pushed back twice, from April 2 to July 9 and then to August 1. While the White House had initially aimed for 90 deals in 90 days, it has fallen significantly short, securing only 8 agreements in 120 days, including one with the European Union. Among the recent outcomes, a new trade deal with South Korea was announced, imposing a 15% import tax on its goods, a measure poised to impact the country's top exports to the U.S., notably vehicles and electronics, as well as popular skincare and cosmetics. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat, New York, was quick to criticize this, stating on the Senate floor that a 15% tariff was far from a victory because it is American families who are ones who are going to have to pay for it in the end, calling it a lot of money to a lot of people. Meanwhile, negotiations continued elsewhere, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressing optimism about the makings of a deal with China after 2 days of talks in Stockholm. Bessent indicated that he and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer would consult President Trump regarding a potential extension of China's current tariff deadline of August 12, beyond which rates are set to rise from their current 30% levels. A deal was also clinched with Pakistan, which Islamabad described as leading to lower tariffs on its exports, while the U.S. emphasized a pact to develop the South Asian nation's oil reserves, though specific tariff rates were not disclosed. Pakistan, a major non-NATO ally, had faced a potential 29% tariff declared in April, later suspended. However, not all trade relationships saw positive developments. India, a crucial Asian partner and counterweight to China, found itself under particular scrutiny. President Trump announced a 25% tariff on Indian imports, along with an unspecified penalty over India's purchases of Russian energy and military equipment, despite the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. In a late-night Truth Social post, Trump declared, "I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care." This marked a significant blow to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had cultivated a true friend relationship with Trump, nurturing it with flattery and joint appearances. Indian officials and analysts now lament that this much-touted bond has soured, with the Trump administration seemingly treating India on par with its arch-nemesis Pakistan. The damage, according to Ashok Malik, chair of the India practice at the Asia Group, has shaken a relationship painstakingly built over decades, which had allowed India to grow closer to the U.S. on its own terms and take a firmer stance on China. The tariffs threaten India's rapidly growing exports to the U.S., estimated at $130 billion in goods last year, including pharmaceuticals and electronics, with Apple's CEO Tim Cook having recently predicted that the majority of iPhones sold in the U.S. would soon originate from India. A major sticking point in negotiations remains agriculture, a politically sensitive sector in India where opening markets to American products could severely impact its debt-ridden farmers. Dr. Aparna Pandey, director of the India Initiative at Hudson Institute, noted that India faces for the first time in 35 years an American administration that is not driven by strategic altruism. Further complicating the trade picture, President Trump issued a warning to Canada, stating that its plan to recognize a Palestinian state will make it very hard to reach a trade deal before impending tariffs. This diplomatic pressure comes as the administration defends its broad tariff regime in a federal appeals court, facing a crucial legal challenge to Trump's authority to impose across-the-board duties without congressional approval. The outcome of this case, heard by an 11-judge panel, could have profound implications for the future of U.S. trade policy. Beyond the immediate trade headlines, the administration was active on several fronts. President Trump hosted professional athletes at the White House to sign an executive order revitalizing the President's Council on Sports Fitness and Nutrition and notably reviving the 1960s-era presidential fitness test in public schools. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated this was to ensure America's future generations are strong, healthy, and successful, emphasizing the need for military readiness. In other news, U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro announced an effort to identify illegals who are currently burrowed in our criminal justice system, aligning with a Trump executive order. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff also met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem to discuss the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, a topic Trump had earlier commented on, emphasizing Israel's lot of responsibility for flow of aid. J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon met with Trump twice in the Oval Office to discuss trade, the Federal Reserve, and the economy, underscoring the ongoing dialogue between the administration and key financial leaders despite Trump's past criticisms of Dimon as a highly overrated globalist. As the dust settles on this latest flurry of announcements, the coming weeks will be critical. The 90-day delay for Mexico offers a temporary breathing room, but the underlying tensions in global trade remain. The Federal Appeals Court's decision on the legality of the tariffs will shape the administration's future leverage, while ongoing negotiations with China and the fallout from the strained relationship with India will continue to define the international economic landscape. For businesses, particularly in the tech and automotive sectors, the persistent uncertainty of tariff policies and the transactional nature of U.S. trade relations demand constant vigilance and adaptation in an increasingly complex global marketplace. As the clock ticks down to the highly anticipated August 1 tariff deadline, the global trade landscape is being reshaped at a dizzying pace by a flurry of aggressive moves and last-minute negotiations orchestrated from Washington. President Donald Trump, leveraging his Truth Social platform as a primary policy megaphone, has unleashed a wave of sweeping tariffs, reprieves, and unexpected deals, aiming to forge what he terms a new global trade order. The rapid-fire announcements, often delivered with little conventional diplomatic preamble, have sent shockwaves through international markets and boardrooms, prompting a scramble among nations to secure favorable terms or brace for economic fallout. The past few days have been a testament to this high-stakes brinkmanship. In a significant 11th-hour development, President Trump announced a 90-day reprieve on higher tariffs for Mexico following discussions with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. This extension, aimed at allowing more time for comprehensive trade negotiations, averts an immediate escalation with the United States' largest trade partner, though imports from Mexico will still face existing duties on metals and cars. Conversely, relations with Canada have soured, with Trump directly linking Ottawa's support for Palestinian statehood to a tougher stance on trade talks. Wow! Canada has just announced that it is backing statehood for Palestine. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them, Trump posted on Truth Social, signaling a departure from traditional trade diplomacy where geopolitical stances are often compartmentalized. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had already indicated that talks might not conclude by the looming deadline, underscoring the friction. Elsewhere, the administration has been busy striking a patchwork of agreements, some with significant financial commitments. South Korea, for instance, has agreed to a 15% tariff rate on its imports, mirroring a similar arrangement with Japan, but critically, it has pledged a staggering $350 billion in investments in the U.S. and an additional $100 billion for purchases of U.S. liquefied natural gas, LNG, and other energy products. This deal, announced by Trump as a full and complete trade deal, highlights a transactional approach where market access is directly tied to investment and energy commitments. Meanwhile, a preliminary trade agreement has been reached with the European Union, narrowly averting an all-out trade war. This deal imposes a 15% import tariff on most EU goods, covering an estimated 70% of the bloc's exports to the US, including pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and cars. In return, the EU has pledged $750 billion in U.S. energy product purchases and $600 billion in investments into the U.S. economy, along with an unspecified amount for weapons purchases. However, critical details, particularly regarding steel and aluminum tariffs, remain unresolved, leaving some European leaders like Germany's Chancellor Merz expressing concerns about the potential economic impact. Not all nations have found a path to reprieve. India, a long-standing strategic partner, faces a stern challenge. President Trump threatened a punitive 25% tariff on Indian goods, coupled with an unspecified penalty for what he described as India's cozy ties with Russia, particularly its purchases of Russian energy and weapons. This move, delivered via social media, has caught Indian diplomats and markets off guard, with economists warning of a potential 0.2 percentage point drag on India's GDP growth. Observers, including Syed Zubair Ahmed, in an NDTV opinion piece, characterized Trump's approach as a blunt instrument wielded for selfish reasons, for dominance and spectacle, arguing that the tariffs are less about fairness and more about raw geopolitical muscle. The opinion piece further highlights the hypocrisy of punishing India for Russian energy imports, given that some Western nations continued similar practices long after sanctions were imposed. Brazil, another major economy, is also contending with 50% tariffs on many of its goods. Although key U.S. imports like orange juice and aircraft parts from Embraer have been exempted, the justification for these tariffs, reportedly tied to a 1977 law concerning the prosecution of former President Jair Bolsonaro, further underscores the unconventional nature of the administration's trade tactics. Beyond country-specific negotiations, the Trump administration has unveiled broader policy shifts set to take effect. A new order imposes 50% tariffs on semi-finished copper products starting August 1, a move that has already sent shockwaves through the global copper market, causing a record plunge in U.S. prices after exempting widely traded refined metals and input materials. Furthermore, the de minimis exemption, which previously allowed low-value imports under $800 to enter without tariffs, will end on August 29. A significant blow to online retailers and consumers of inexpensive goods. The economic reverberations of these policies are already being felt. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell noted the early beginnings of tariff inflation, with companies like Procter & Gamble, Mondelez, and L'Oreal announcing price hikes to offset higher costs. Corporate earnings reports reflect this pressure, with luxury car brands Aston Martin and Porsche cutting profitability targets and Stellantis warning of a $1.73 billion tariff impact in 2025. Harley-Davidson also missed profit estimates, citing tariff weights. While some companies like BMW are maintaining guidance and Philips even saw its stock rise on a softer-than-feared tariff hit, the overall sentiment among businesses exposed to international trade remains cautious. Despite the turbulence, the U.S. goods trade deficit narrowed to a nearly two-year low in June as imports tumbled and the IMF, while edging its 2025 growth forecast slightly higher, continues to warn of tariff risks dogging the global outlook. Adding another layer to this chaotic trade narrative is the president's public engagement with domestic politics. On Thursday, Trump was set to meet federal appeal court judges to defend his tariffs, a move he previewed on Truth Social, declaring tariffs are making America great and rich again. This direct engagement with the judiciary underscores the administration's determination to push its trade agenda despite legal challenges. Meanwhile, a heated exchange with Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri further illustrated Trump's penchant for using social media to exert pressure and shape narratives. Trump publicly slammed Hawley as a second-tier senator for supporting a bill that would ban insider stock trading by lawmakers, presidents, and vice presidents. Hawley clarified that the bill deliberately acronymed Pelosi to target former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, specifically exempts the assets of the president and vice president, asserting that its true aim is to make such trading illegal and prosecutable for members of Congress. This public spat, played out on social media, highlights the intertwined nature of Trump's trade policies, political maneuvers, and communication strategy. As the August 1 deadline passes, the global economy braces for the full impact of these new tariff regimes. The current era of trade, characterized by real-time policy announcements on social media and a transactional approach to international relations, stands in stark contrast to traditional multilateral diplomacy. While some deals have been struck, many remain light on detail, and the unpredictability of the American approach has prompted calls for nations like India to diversify their trade relations and strengthen domestic manufacturing. The question remains whether this aggressive unilateral projection of economic power will ultimately foster a more balanced global trade system, or if it will simply lead to prolonged instability and a fragmented international economic order where posts and tweets can overshadow treaties. The coming months will undoubtedly reveal the true long-term consequences of this unprecedented economic experiment. In a week marked by escalating trade tensions and bold executive actions, the Trump administration has signaled a renewed aggressive stance on international trade and digital sovereignty, extending a tariff agreement with Mexico while simultaneously imposing sweeping new duties on Brazil. These moves underscore a deepening commitment to leveraging economic policy as a tool for both domestic and foreign policy objectives, drawing sharp commentary from policy analysts regarding the politicization of critical sectors including artificial intelligence. On Thursday, July 31, 2025, President Donald Trump announced a 90-day extension of the existing tariff agreement with Mexico following a phone call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. The current arrangement, which was set to expire on August 1, will maintain a 25% tariff on non-USMCA-compliant goods alongside a 50% tariff on steel, aluminum, copper, and their derivative products. In a post on Truth Social, Trump stated Mexico will continue to pay a 25% fentanyl tariff, 25% tariff on cars, and 50% tariff on steel, aluminum, and copper. Additionally, Mexico has agreed to immediately terminate its non-tariff trade barriers, of which there were many. He added that discussions aimed at a comprehensive trade deal would continue for 90 days or longer, a step back from his earlier threat of a 30% tariff rate. This extension, while offering a temporary reprieve, keeps the pressure firmly on Mexico, reflecting the administration's consistent use of tariffs to enforce trade and implicitly border security objectives. Just a day prior, the president had also announced a 15% tariff rate on South Korea, further illustrating his broader strategy. However, the most significant and far-reaching action came on Wednesday, July 30, 2025, with a White House executive order declaring a national emergency regarding Brazil. This unprecedented move imposes an additional 40% ad valorem duty on a wide range of Brazilian products effective 7 days from the order's signing. The executive order, titled Addressing Threats to the United States by the Government of Brazil, asserts that Brazil's recent policies and actions threaten the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States. The administration specifically cited concerns over the Brazilian government's alleged interference with the U.S. economy, infringement of free expression rights of U.S. persons, human rights violations, and undermining of the rule of law. The White House statement detailed alarming instances of Brazilian officials, particularly Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes, purportedly abusing judicial authority. The order alleges that Justice de Moraes has issued orders to compel United States online platforms to censor the accounts or content of United States persons, blocked their ability to raise money, demanded changes to content moderation policies and algorithms, and sought user data, all under the pretext of combating disinformation, fake news, or anti-democratic or hateful content. These actions, the administration argues, endanger the economy of the United States by tyrannically and arbitrarily coercing United States companies to censor political speech, turn over sensitive United States user data, or change their content moderation policies on pain of extraordinary fines, criminal prosecution, asset freezes, or complete exclusion from the Brazilian market. The order also highlights the political persecution of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro as a contributing factor to the breakdown of the rule of law. The 40% tariff on Brazilian goods is designed to directly counter these perceived threats, with the administration explicitly stating that the duty is in addition to any other duties, fees, taxes, exactions, and charges applicable to such imports, and is taken only for the purpose of addressing the national emergency. Notably, certain categories of goods including civil aircraft and their components, silicon, metal, pig iron, energy products and fertilizers are exempted from this new duty. The executive order also contains a modification authority clause allowing the president to adjust the tariffs further if Brazil retaliates or conversely takes significant steps to address the national emergency. The Brookings Institution, a prominent think tank, quickly weighed in on these developments, publishing an article titled "Trump's Executive Orders Politicize AI." While the full scope of their analysis was not provided, the title itself suggests a critical perspective on how the administration's broad use of executive power, particularly in the context of compelling tech companies to alter their operations, could be seen as a politicization of artificial intelligence and digital governance. The Brazil executive order provides a concrete example of this intersection where a nation's judicial and political actions directly impact the operational freedom and data privacy policies of major U.S. technology platforms. These recent actions signal a robust tariff-centric approach to global relations where economic leverage is applied not just for traditional trade imbalances but also for issues ranging from drug trafficking and border control to human rights and digital free speech. The implications are far-reaching. For businesses, the unpredictability of tariff impositions and extensions creates significant supply chain challenges and investment uncertainty. For the tech industry, the Brazil order sets a potentially troubling precedent where compliance with foreign legal mandates could put them at direct odds with U.S. policy and First Amendment principles. As the Trump administration continues to defend its tariff strategy, with the president himself declaring tariffs are making America great and rich again, the coming months will test the resolve of affected nations and the resilience of a global economy increasingly shaped by the intersection of trade technology and geopolitical will. The outcome of ongoing negotiations with Mexico, Brazil's response to the new tariffs, and the inevitable legal challenges will undoubtedly define the contours of international commerce and digital governance for the foreseeable future. The economic landscape for American families is proving to be a turbulent sea. With a new report from the Century Foundation (TCF) casting a stark light on widespread financial anxiety and the escalating costs of basic living under the current administration. Published on July 31, 2025, TCF's comprehensive analysis based on a June survey of over 2,000 voters reveals that many Americans are grappling with an economy that compels them towards risky financial behaviors even as President Donald Trump asserts the efficacy of his policies, particularly his aggressive use of tariffs. According to the TCF report, financial insecurity is not merely prevalent but consuming, with a significant 61% of Americans attributing a worsening cost of living directly to President Trump's time in office. The anxieties span critical areas. A staggering 83% are concerned about grocery prices, with nearly two-thirds 63% linking negative impacts to the president's policies. Beyond the immediate grocery bill, nearly 8 in 10 Americans, including a notable 68% of Republicans, express worry that Trump's tariffs will inflate prices on everyday goods like clothing and appliances. This pervasive concern extends to broader economic stability, with 76% fearing a possible recession and 58% specifically worried about affording healthcare should a downturn occur. The report underscores the fragility of household finances, noting that almost half of all Americans, 48%, and even higher percentages among Blacks, 61%, Hispanic 57%, and Millennial 56% communities would struggle to pay an unexpected $500 bill without resorting to borrowing. The mental toll is also significant, with nearly a quarter of respondents spending at least 3 hours daily worrying about basic affordability. In response to these mounting pressures, American families are increasingly resorting to desperate measures. The TCF survey found that in the past year, 41% have tapped into savings just to cover bills, 37% have relied on credit cards, and 29% have incurred new debt for basic necessities. These coping strategies are particularly pronounced among millennials, 50%, Hispanics 48%. And Black respondents 47%, who reported dipping into savings. Alarmingly, 1 in 4 Americans admitted to skipping meals in the last 12 months to save money. Julie Margetta Morgan, president of the Century Foundation and a co-author of the report, emphasized the severity of the situation, stating American families are not okay in Donald Trump's economy. Faced with high prices and increasing costs of living, working people are struggling to afford the basics, pay their bills, and simply stay afloat as Trump and Republicans take a wrecking ball to their economic futures. She warned that as the Trump administration tears down America's safety net, families are increasingly being forced to build their own safety nets out of high-cost financial products. The result will be a crisis of household debt that puts us all at risk. The report further highlights that the struggle extends beyond immediate expenses like groceries and gas to fundamental aspects of a comfortable life. A vast majority believe it has become harder over the last 25 years to buy a home. 73% pay for college, 72% find affordable childcare and raise a family, 69%, and simply pay the bills, 65%. Americans overwhelmingly place the blame for these difficulties on corporations, 51%, and billionaires, 52%, with 50% also pointing fingers at congressional Republicans. This sentiment translates into a strong desire for government intervention, with broad bipartisan majorities calling for federal action to hold companies accountable for inflating prescription drug prices, 81%, strengthen regulations to prevent consumer exploitation, 80%. And prosecute companies colluding to raise prices, 78%. There's also significant support for the government prioritizing help for workers whose wages are stolen, 78%, and taxing the wealthy and corporations, 76%. Rachel West, TCF Senior Fellow and report co-author, elaborated, Americans recognize that their lives have gotten harder because corporations and the wealthy have seen their power and profits explode, and they overwhelmingly want the government to take more aggressive steps to rebalance the economic scales in favor of working people, not the ultra-rich. Central to President Trump's economic strategy and a significant factor in these rising costs is his aggressive use of tariffs. These import taxes, levied as a percentage of a product's value, are paid by companies bringing foreign goods into the U.S., who then often pass these additional costs on to consumers. Since returning to office in January, President Trump has introduced and threatened a series of such taxes, arguing they boost American manufacturing, protect jobs, and reduce the trade deficit by encouraging consumers to buy American-made goods. He asserts that the U.S. has been taken advantage of by cheaters and pillaged by foreign nations. New U.S. tariffs on goods from several key trading partners are set to take effect on August 1, following a period of intense negotiation and some legal challenges. While a U.S. trade court initially ruled against some tariffs imposed under national emergency powers, an appeals court allowed them to remain in place pending further review. Specific tariffs include a 50% levy on steel and aluminum imports, 50% on copper, and 25% on foreign-made cars and parts. There have also been threats of a 200% tariff on pharmaceutical imports and the removal of the global $800 de minimis tariff exemption, which had already been rescinded for products from China and Hong Kong. On a country-specific basis, new rates effective August 1 include 15% for Japanese and South Korean goods, 19% for Indonesian and Filipino goods, 20% for Vietnamese goods, 25% plus a penalty for Indian goods, and 50% for Brazilian goods. The EU has agreed to 15% tariffs on European goods, including cars, while the UK has negotiated a comparatively low 10% rate for the first 100,000 vehicles exported annually. Tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods also remain in flux, with potential rates of 35% and 30% respectively, excluding NAFTA-covered products. U.S.-Chinese trade negotiations are ongoing, with a pause on previously high tariffs set to end on August 12. The global economy has reacted to these tariff announcements with volatility, though markets have recently stabilized. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) have both downgraded their predictions for global economic growth in 2025, anticipating a significant negative impact on the U.S. economy itself. Domestically, analysts confirm that tariffs are already contributing to U.S. inflation, with prices rising 2.7% in the year to June, up from 2.4% the previous month. Companies like Adidas, Nike, and Mattel have confirmed plans to raise prices for American customers due to increased import costs. Beyond direct price hikes, tariffs are also leading to higher costs for U.S. manufactured goods that rely on imported components, and stricter customs checks are causing border delays. In response to these economic shifts, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has signed an executive order to examine the specific impact of Trump's tariffs on the state's economy, highlighting localized concerns. Despite the growing evidence of consumer strain and global economic disruption, President Trump continues to claim credit for the economy, maintaining that his trade policies are working. However, influential voices within his own Republican Party, alongside opposition Democrats and foreign leaders, have publicly criticized these measures. As American families navigate a landscape of rising costs and financial precarity, and as the full scope of the administration's tariff policies takes hold, the debate over economic direction and its real-world impact on everyday lives will undoubtedly remain a central theme in the political and social discourse shaping the choices voters face in the coming years. In a period marked by an accelerating pace of policy implementation, the current U.S. administration has rapidly unveiled and executed a series of ambitious initiatives, fundamentally reshaping the nation's economic and defense landscapes. From a dramatic overhaul of international trade policies to a significant reinvestment in national security infrastructure, the first 6 months of President Donald Trump's second term have set a new precedent for governmental action, sparking both praise and debate across various sectors. At the heart of this transformation lies a bold new approach to international trade centered on the imposition of substantial tariffs. This strategy, a stark departure from decades of free trade orthodoxy, is already yielding remarkable financial returns. In June, the United States collected an unprecedented $27 billion in tariff revenue, a figure projected to rise further. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent declared earlier in July that this could swell to well over $300 billion by the end of the year, a staggering increase compared to the $77 billion collected in all of 2024. Bessent even estimates a potential $2.8 trillion over 10 years, signaling a long-term shift in federal revenue streams. This surge follows a consistent upward trend, with January's $8 billion in tariff collections more than doubling to $16.3 billion by April. The administration has swiftly concluded new tariff and trade agreements with key partners including the United Kingdom, Israel, Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam, and most recently the European Union, with ongoing negotiations with China promising further expansions. This aggressive trade stance has prompted considerable discussion, particularly given the historical adherence of many, including traditional Republicans, to the Chicago School of Economics, which champions low tariffs and free trade. Yet, despite initial skepticism and dire warnings about consumer price hikes and economic stagnation, the U.S. economy has shown remarkable resilience. Stock markets, after an initial dip upon the announcement of the ambitious trade agenda, have soared to new highs. And the second quarter of this year, the first full quarter of the new term, witnessed a robust 3% GDP growth, according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. Fox Business host Charles Payne has highlighted how the burgeoning surplus from these tariffs is likely to be channeled directly into decreasing the national debt. Moreover, some commentators like Hugh Hewitt are reconsidering their long-held views, suggesting that tariff revenue could serve as a crucial contribution from trading nations towards the immense cost of America's role in securing freedom of the seas, a burden the U.S. has largely shouldered for 8 decades since World War II. This perspective aligns with the administration's focus on ensuring that other nations contribute to the global security framework that facilitates international commerce. However, the legal boundaries of the president's authority in enacting such sweeping trade changes remain under scrutiny. With cases like VOS Selections versus Trump brought by small businesses in states alleging harm from import taxes currently pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. The financial windfall from tariffs is also directly fueling a significant expansion of the nation's defense capabilities. A One Big Beautiful Bill has already allocated a much-needed $158 billion surge in defense spending, with a substantial portion earmarked for the Navy and its shipbuilding and repair capacity. A cornerstone of this defense initiative is the Golden Dome Homeland Shield Project, a comprehensive air and missile defense system modeled after Israel's Iron Dome. The Missile Defense Agency (MDA) recently issued a $151 billion draft proposal for the Scalable Homeland Innovative Enterprise Layered Defense Shield program, which underpins the Golden Dome concept. This ambitious system, projected to cost up to $175 billion and be operational within 3 years, is designed to provide continuous layered protection against a spectrum of threats, including ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise missiles, as well as drones originating from any vector. It leverages advanced technologies such as digital engineering, artificial intelligence, and machine learning alongside open systems architecture to ensure rapid tasking and modernization. L3Harris has already expanded its space manufacturing facility to support the development of the advanced satellites and sensors crucial to the Golden Dome's detection and tracking capabilities. While lauded domestically, the Golden Dome initiative has drawn criticism from nations like North Korea, Russia, and China, who view it as a destabilizing move that could escalate the militarization of space. The administration has even extended an offer to Canada to join the system for free if it becomes the 51st U.S. state, otherwise proposing a $61 billion participation fee. Beyond trade and defense, the administration's proactive stance extends to critical infrastructure and energy independence. A Lightning reactor build program has been launched, igniting the nuclear sector and signaling a renewed commitment to nuclear power as a vital component of the nation's energy future. This initiative promises to bolster domestic energy production, reduce reliance on external sources, and potentially contribute to long-term economic stability and technological leadership. The sheer volume and scope of policy changes enacted in such a short timeframe underscore a determined effort to fulfill campaign promises and redefine America's role on the global stage. From a recalibration of international trade to a robust rearmament and a push for energy innovation, these interconnected initiatives are poised to have profound and lasting impacts. As the legal challenges unfold, economic indicators continue to be monitored and new defense systems take shape. The coming months will reveal the full extent of this transformative agenda and its implications for the U.S. economy, national security, and international relations. The global diplomatic landscape is undergoing a profound transformation marked by shifting alliances, strategic reorientations, and the stark re-emergence of long-standing geopolitical challenges. As nations grapple with resource competition, enduring conflicts, and the complexities of nuclear proliferation, the United States finds itself navigating an increasingly fragmented international arena, particularly evident in the recent actions and pronouncements from the Trump administration. This evolving dynamic underscores a period of significant uncertainty and potential realignment in global power structures. One key area of focus for the Trump administration centers on securing critical minerals from Africa, a strategic imperative driven by intense competition with China. However, this ambition is unfolding against a backdrop of significant internal challenges within the U.S. State Department. Jonathan Pratt, the senior official at the Bureau of African Affairs, recently sought to reassure anxious senators about the impact of widespread staff cuts, acknowledging, "I am also very concerned about staffing, as you can imagine. We're very much building this plane as we fly." Pratt's promotion followed the retirement of Troy Fittrell and coincided with the administration's decision to lay off approximately 1,300 State Department staffers. Such significant reductions in diplomatic personnel raise serious questions about the U.S.'s capacity to effectively execute its foreign policy objectives, particularly in complex regions like Africa, where nuanced engagement and deep institutional knowledge are paramount for fostering partnerships and countering rival influences. Critics argue that these staffing cuts inflict generational damage to American diplomacy, eroding institutional memory and expertise at a time when global challenges demand robust and experienced diplomatic engagement. Simultaneously, the Trump administration is attempting to reignite stalled denuclearization talks with North Korea, even as Pyongyang issues stern warnings against external pressure. White House officials affirmed President Trump's continued openness to engaging with leader Kim Jong-un, stating President Trump in his first term held 3 historic summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un that stabilized the Korean peninsula and achieved the first-ever leader-level agreement on denuclearization. The president retains those objectives and remains open to engaging with leader Kim to achieve a fully denuclearized North Korea. However, North Korea's powerful figure Kim Yo-jong underscored the chasm between the two sides, claiming the country's nuclear arsenal has significantly expanded since their last meeting and warning that any future summit focused on nuclear disarmament would be seen as nothing but a mockery. Despite the warmth often projected by Trump towards Rocket Man, as he once dubbed Kim, the substantive progress on denuclearization has been minimal since their 2018 Singapore summit, where a vague agreement was signed. Subsequent meetings in Hanoi and at the Korean Demilitarized Zone failed to bridge the gap, with talks collapsing over North Korea's demand for full sanctions relief in exchange for partial disarmament. This ongoing stalemate, coupled with North Korea's resumed weapons testing, highlights the formidable challenge of achieving denuclearization without a significant shift in either side's entrenched positions. Perhaps the most striking divergence in U.S. foreign policy from its traditional allies is playing out in the Middle East, specifically regarding the future of Gaza. A significant diplomatic rift has emerged as key U.S. allies, including France, the UK, and most recently Canada, have announced plans to recognize a Palestinian state under certain conditions. This move directly contradicts the Trump administration's stance, which boycotted a French Saudi-led conference at the United Nations calling for a rekindling of the two-state solution, deriding it as a publicity stunt. This marks a stark departure from the Tokyo principles laid out by then U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in November 2023, which outlined conditions for Gaza's post-war future, including no forcible displacement of Palestinians, no Israeli reoccupation, and Palestinian-led governance. These principles, though largely forgotten by the Trump administration, remain a rallying point for many U.S. allies now pushing for a diplomatic shift. The absence of a coherent internationally backed plan for Gaza's future governance from the Trump administration has left a strategic vacuum. Early ideas such as President Trump's concept of transforming Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East, involving the forced displacement of Palestinians, were quietly dropped due to their unfeasibility and rejection by Arab nations. The administration's current approach appears to closely parallel that of its Israeli ally, focusing on freeing hostages and achieving a ceasefire but lacking a clear long-term vision beyond the immediate cessation of hostilities. This aligns with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's rejection of Palestinian Authority involvement in Gaza's future and demands from his far-right coalition for permanent military occupation and settlement expansion. The dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, characterized by famine, levels of malnutrition, and widespread disease, has served as an inflection point for European countries. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy articulated this moral impetus, stating, "We have seen the most horrific scenes. The global community is deeply offended by children being shot and killed as they reach out for aid." Unlike the previous administration, which at times used the threat of restricting U.S. weapons to pressure Israel on aid access, the current administration has accelerated arms shipments, further widening the gap with allies who are now actively seeking to fill the diplomatic void. The collective statement from European nations and Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, to push for urgent aid intervention, support the Palestinian Authority, and revive the two-state solution even without U.S. endorsement, signifies a significant challenge to traditional Western diplomatic conventions. This concerted effort by allies to chart an independent course, particularly on an issue as sensitive as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, underscores a broader trend of multilateralism proceeding without or even in opposition to the United States. As the world watches these geopolitical chess pieces move, the implications for global stability and the future of international cooperation remain profoundly uncertain. The empty superpower seat at critical diplomatic tables suggests a future where U.S. influence may be increasingly contested and its allies more willing to forge new paths in response to pressing global crises.